I'm your host, Jill, and I'm really excited because today is the first guest speaker episode. I have an incredible guest lined up for you, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But really quick, before we get into this episode, I want to remind you that I am doing a no pants challenge on my Instagram. This sounds so funny, but if you go to my Instagram, I am embracing more femininity by not wearing pants unless I'm working out or lounging around the house, which doesn't even happen that much. Other than that, I'm wearing a dress or a skirt. And truly, this has been quite eye-opening for me this past week so far. We are into 8 days at the time of recording this podcast. We're into 8 days of this challenge, and I'm doing it for 30 days. And I've found myself to be so much more productive every single day, more put together, and more confident when I'm around people because I know I don't look frumpy. And also, every single day, my husband has come home and he's like, "You look really pretty today." That just warms my heart. So, just saying, it's a really fun challenge. I've had quite a few other women join in with me on it, and we've been having fun with it. So make sure you're over with me on Instagram, following along with the No Pants Challenge and what we learned from that. Also, if you love what you hear from today's episode, if you could please like this episode, give it 4 stars, whatever platform you're listening to on it. Please go ahead and rate it, comment, and share it with your friends to help this podcast get discovered. I would appreciate that so much. So, as we're jumping into today's episode, I have a guest for you lined up, and I'm going to introduce her in it. What you're going to be hearing is the audio recording from the Zoom interview with my friend Katie. She is a pro-life activist, and you're going to hear so much through this episode, so let's jump right into it. Hello and welcome to the Myrrh-Bearing Millennial Podcast. I'm so excited for tonight's episode. I have a dear friend of mine who we actually met through the Orthodox Church, the original one that my husband became a catechumen at. This is Katie Breckenridge. And her and I have had many conversations about the pro-life movement and everything surrounding that. So I'm really excited to have her on here tonight. Katie, welcome. Tell us about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Hello, thank you for having me. Well, I'm Katie Breckenridge, as you said. I work for the Children's Rights Organization, Them Before Us. We exist to educate and advocate about the rights of children to their biological mothers and fathers. And rather than expecting children to sacrifice fundamental rights for the sake of adult desires. So we advocate for children's natural rights to life, to their biological mothers and fathers, as I said, and their rights to not be commodified. So we speak against reproductive technologies, no-fault divorce, same-sex parenting, anything that separates children from the ideal familial structure, where they're statistically the most likely to thrive. And I also write for Them Before Us. I'm the external affairs liaison, so I deal with I write and I do newsletters, and anytime there's a legislature that we are trying to fight, I'll contact people who we can work with to fight them. And I write for various outlets such as The Federalist and Salvo Magazine. I'm a premier fellow for the Society of St. Sebastian. It's a Catholic public policy organization. And I recently was in Scotland writing for the Scottish Press on assisted suicide with the Scottish Council on Human Bioethics. So that was awesome. And I've been involved in, yeah, and I've been involved in various facets of the pro-life movement. March for Life. I've done 40 Days for Life vigils. I've coordinated 40 Days for Life 365 briefly, which is the year-round vigils. I volunteered at a crisis pregnancy center, and but my main involvement in the pro-life movement is I work with Vision for Life, which is a pregnancy a advertising organization that advertises crisis pregnancy centers around Pittsburgh. So
oh my gosh,
know that to give people more options besides abortion, so that they know that these centers exist and they can go to people who care and
so I have to be honest,
keep their children.
Like, I knew you were super involved in the pro-life movement, but I didn't realize that much. And I totally thought the Scotland trip was vacation because I saw all the photos. I was like,
Oh
this
no.
looks amazing. You went there for
I
work?
mean, it was partly vacation, but I also did some writing. Yeah.
That's amazing. Oh my, so you are seriously like one of the go-to people when it comes to pro-life.
I try.
That's awesome. Okay, so how did you like get into that?
Yeah, so it actually started. I was I was in college and I was down the rabbit hole of YouTube one night, and as we all do, and like I had always been pro-life. Like I was always against abortion, but I never really I don't want to say I didn't care, but I never really gave it much thought other than this is wrong. And um, so then I, yeah, when I was down the rabbit hole of YouTube, I actually came across a video on traditional surrogacy, which is when I'm sure we'll go more into surrogacy later when we talk about reproductive technologies, but so there's gestational surrogacy and traditional surrogacy. And traditional is where, well, gestational is where a woman carries an embryo that has genetic material from a a different mother and father. Like she's not the genetic mother,
Mhm.
even though she would be the biological one, but that's another story. And traditional is when a woman carries her own biological child and genetic child for another couple. So it's her egg and she's usually artificially inseminated with sperm from the couple that the baby's going to. And so I was very disturbed listening to this traditional surrogate talk about how she didn't how the child she was carrying wasn't hers and she didn't love the child like her other ones. um she felt no connection to him, and I was really disturbed by that because first, like, this is her genetic child. This child has the same amount of her genetics as the children that she had with her husband. Like
Right.
there's no difference here. And I was really disturbed by how nonchalantly she was just like, yeah, I don't love this child like my own. I was like, it's just, there's a lot of brainwashing going on there, I think. And
Yeah.
I was really disturbed by this. I was like, what can I do to fight against this? To fight against this what's the word? Kind of this objectification of children.
Right.
And I there weren't many groups around fighting surrogacy. Well, there still aren't. And so I was like, okay, well, that led me to get more involved in fighting abortion because I needed to do something
Right.
and something to help like these immoral issues. And yeah, so that's how that happened. And then that's how I got connected with Vision for Life initially. And I found them before us. And they were actually advocating against surrogacy and reproductive technologies. And so now I get to actually do both, which is great. Everything I'm against passionate about fighting against, I get to do. So yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so in your own words, then, I guess go ahead and explain exactly what the pro-life movement is and why it's so important.
There's a lot of apathy towards preborn children um, getting killed. People
Yeah.
tend not to. I find that other than the very, very hardcore pro-choice people, um, a lot of people don't agree with abortion, but they just turn their heads and go, "Oh well, it doesn't affect me. Like it's not any of my business." And
Right.
people need to be made aware that it is everybody's business
Mhm.
that we're killing innocent human beings,
Yeah.
and also getting involved in marches and prayer vigils and any other grassroots type of activism that you can for abortion sends a message to people that it's still not normal, like because it becomes kind of normalized when people stop fighting against it. So people need to be made aware, like, oh, there's still people fighting against this, and people I think that helps people to actually think like, oh, maybe there's actually something wrong about this.
Right.
Um, as when you're, constantly reminded that people are still fighting against this.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so it's a lot of bringing awareness and educating.
I think a lot of people also just hear like women's rights are being taken away, and then they're just jumping on the
Yeah,
bandwagon for that, not realizing what they're even jumping on the bandwagon for.
exactly. And like they don't realize that it's not about women taking rights away from women. I mean, I don't know a single pro-lifer. I mean, the majority of pro-lifers, well, I don't know about the majority, but like a huge amount of pro-lifers are women. So it's like, pro-life
Yeah.
women exist. We're not trying to like, I personally
Right
don't want to
here.
control other women. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Right. I don't want to take your medical freedom away, but whenever it comes to a baby, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
Like it's not just about you at this point.
Because I always say to people like that, well, I guess this is kind of going off subject here, but when people say like, oh, you just don't care about women suffering or children, like you don't care about children after they're born and
Right.
like things like that. I just like first off, I'm not like what satisfaction do I get out of children suffering after they're born? Like I'm not a sadist. Like I don't and I know people always use that argument in terms of how conservatives tend to vote more against like, social programs that like the other side sees as helping families, but I don't think that really has anything to do with like, it's not a cold-hearted it's not motivated by wanting kids to suffer. It's more like like maybe people just have different ideas of how to better like allocate that tax money, or people might think there are already enough social programs and things like that.
Right.
And then I always think on the other hand, those who advocate for more social programs, if those were implemented, would they suddenly be against abortion if these were implemented? Like, no.
Right.
So let's just start with the bottom line of not killing our children.
Yep.
It's not about controlling women. It's not about wanting kids to suffer after they're born. Yeah.
It's about fighting for the innocent lives of children. And that's you and I kind of had a similar experience. Like I can remember because I was a victims advocate for 2 years. And I can remember going into my job interview for that job. And I specialized in working with victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And one of the very first questions I was asked was, what's your opinion on abortion? And at the time I was just like, I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
have one. Um, But the reason I was asked that question was because when I sit with a victim, I'm to be unbiased. To offer all options available, provide them all the
Mm-hmm.
information and so forth. And so that's what I had to do. And I didn't know any better. And it literally wasn't until I became pregnant with my daughter that we were very, very early in the pregnancy. Like I want to say 9, 10 weeks, we had just found out. But I had bleeding. And so we went to the emergency room because we thought something was wrong. And they did an ultrasound and I heard her heartbeat for the very first time. And I was like, I don't care that that she looked like a little
Yeah. Little
peanut, like
bean.
really tiny, tiny. But there was a heartbeat. I heard her heartbeat. And I was like, that is a human being growing inside. And in that had nothing to do with my religion, nothing like that. It was just like, that's a
Yeah.
human. That's a heartbeat. And in that moment, I was like, that's it. Like, I think that was the moment that I realized
That's
I'm
awesome.
pro-life.
Yeah. Yay.
Like we're fighting for children here.
Yes. And I, it's so strange to me. Like the majority of people would obviously, when babies are born, they're like, oh, this is a unique human being. I mean, pretty much everyone would agree. Like, we're all, unique human beings. And it really shouldn't matter. I mean, obviously, life does begin at fertilization, but it shouldn't matter the people that think like, oh, it's just a clump of cells up until a certain point. So it's like, okay, but obviously that clump of cells is becoming a specific person when
Mhm.
it's born, like even if you're viewing it that way. So you're still literally taking,
You as a
this.
human are literally a clump of cells.
Yeah,
You're made
yeah,
up
we're
of
all clumps of cells. That's what
right.
we're made of.
Is there anything that you feel is misunderstood then about the pro-life movement?
We don't adopt kids or foster kids enough, which isn't true. I think Christians specifically have the highest adoption rates.
Mhm.
So that's just not true. And it's just a horrible excuse anyway. Like it shouldn't matter. I mean, we should be helping children, but I mean that's not a requirement
Right.
for being against killing preborn children. So,
Right. No, and that argument, like I always tell people, and it might sound a little cold, but like I was raised in a very, very terrible childhood. And
mm,
so any child has a better life no matter what the circumstances because they have a chance to make something of their life happen than had they never had the chance at all.
yeah.
Like they're able to make
And
those choices as they
yeah,
get
people
older.
act like, oh, we're sparing them from such suffering. It's like they're not aware that they're being spared from anything because they're dead. Like
Right.
it's not
And you have no idea what their future was gonna what was gonna
exactly.
happen in their future.
And even if I also don't like the argument, people always say, well, pro-lifers always say, um, oh, we never know, like this kid could have grown up to cure cancer and stuff. But it's like it shouldn't matter. No
Yeah.
matter what their future is, they're human beings. Like
Yeah.
like it's not they don't need to cure cancer. It's just the fact that they deserve to live as being made in the image of God and
Yeah. So
being unique human beings.
you mentioned the fertilization part. So talk about the science behind the reason why pro-lifers believe that life begins at conception.
Sure. So I have a whole bunch of scientific quotes for you.
Yes, give it to me.
Um, so yeah, scientists know that unique human beings come into existence at fertilization. When sperm meets egg, there's a specific blueprint that is the blueprint for a unique person. There's a professor of neurosurgery and pediatrics at State University of New York said in 2022, so very recently. Obviously, life begins at conception with the fusion of the sperm and the egg. A new human life begins. This is rudimentary biology. I love that. It has been settled science since the early 19th century. From a biological standpoint, it can't be denied. Yet we keep trying. Oh, I like this one. Obstetric nursing. This was sure specifically this is from, but her name is Sally Olds. I assume she's obviously works in obstetric nursing. Thus, a new cell is formed from the union of a male and a female gametes. The cell, referred to as the zygote, contains a new combination of genetic material, resulting in an individual different from either parent and from anyone else in the world. Love that too. Really settled science that human life begins at fertilization,
Right.
but we keep just trying to justify it or justify abortion by saying that it's not a human life up until a certain point to make ourselves feel better, and that's just not true.
And there's so much modern science too that's even showing that the genetics of a human being are created, like honestly, 2 generations before that baby is even fertilized and stuff. Because oh my goodness, what was it called? I was just talking about this with my husband the other night. Epigenetics.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
You know what? Actually, in the IVF process, all the unnatural conditions that embryos are subjected to during that process can actually change the epigenetics of the embryos too.
What?
Yeah.
See, and it blows my mind that people don't see that a human is formed at fertilization,
Yeah.
at conception, because like we have all of this science coming out showing how far back our genes are being created through different generations and stuff. Like whether you believe in God or not, this is science showing
Yeah.
that this is happening.
Oh yeah, it has
This is
nothing to
how
do with
we
God. I mean, well,
evolve.
obviously, I believe it does have something to do with God, but
Yes, so do I.
you don't
But I'm
need to
just
believe
saying,
in
like,
God to
right.
understand this. Yeah.
No, okay. So then let's talk about that reproductive technology then. So like what is this and how do you feel about it?
I think you can probably figure out how you feel about it,
Yeah.
but so okay, reproductive technology is the process of attempting to treat infertility, even though it really only masks infertility. IVF specifically really only masks the issues. It doesn't get to the actual problem. But the main form of reproductive technology is IVF, or in vitro fertilization, which is the process of combining sperm and egg in a petri dish in a laboratory. So,
Yeah.
a very dignified way to start out your life. And then multiple human beings are created in a petri dish. And then they get the ones that are lucky enough to pass pre-implantation genetic screening, which is a screening that weeds out embryos that don't look like they make the grade with their chromosomes and other issues. But, and not everyone opts for this, but it's a very common thing. Pre-implantation genetic screening, which tests for, yeah, chromosomal abnormalities and other issues like cystic fibrosis and
They get to
things.
pick the perfect baby, basically.
Yes. And yeah, and that's if you didn't already decide that you only want to implant girls or boys like Chrissy Teigen and John Legend. And
What? I didn't know they did that.
yeah, the first baby, they specifically wanted a girl, so they only implanted or only transferred girl embryos, and
So
I don't
wait,
know
if
about.
multiple human beings are being created on this petri dish then, and they're choosing one, then the rest are
Yes. Well, you can actually first, um the fact that you can tell the gender of an embryo should tell us a lot about its humanity. But
yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, so you can choose, they tend to implant multiple or transfer multiple to increase the likelihood of implantation, but there's also been evidence that that doesn't actually increase the likelihood, because if your endometrial lining isn't receptive to one of them, it could just get rid of both of them. So it's just a whole trial and error process with human beings.
I had no idea.
And yeah, so the ones that don't get transferred or disposed of through genetic screening, which actually Dr. Craig Terzinski, a former embryologist, um, wrote about how, and there's another article on this too. I forget who it's by. I can send it to you. But um, he wrote about how, like, to the trained eye, some embryos look like they're perfectly healthy, like no chromosomal issues, and often those ones wouldn't implant. But then there's ones that didn't look the best, didn't make the grade, and those ones ended up implanting, and they like didn't know why. And so it's just like you never know. And how many human beings are getting disposed of that would have gotten to live their lives if they weren't subjected to this screening? So it's just a lot of eugenics and unnecessary experimentation with humans.
So I
And
know some people personally who have gone through IVF and they struggled for years to be able to conceive naturally. Are they told about this through the process that this happens?
I want to say probably not outright. I don't actually know. I haven't gone through it, but um, since the reproductive technology industry is a multi-million dollar industry, I would think that they wouldn't give every detail of the process to people. It's probably, and I think they feed on desperation so much anyway that they can word things in a way where people um I guess really, it's hard to say. Like I feel like a lot of the time people are so desperate that it's like no matter what you say to them, they're like, okay, that's fine. But I know there are people that will choose to transfer one embryo at a time, and then they'll make sure that they actually transfer all of them. But to me, that's, I mean, you're still, even if you do one at a time, even if you only fertilize one or only create one embryo at a time, I think that you're still playing trial and error with that one life that you're creating every time. Like you don't know if it's going to implant. And people always use the argument that, oh, well, embryos don't implant naturally all the time either. So what's the difference? But, the difference is that's happening naturally. Like you're
Yeah.
not intentionally creating human beings and going, they're probably, a bunch of them probably aren't going to survive, but that's all right as long as we get our one child. Like it's just not a good approach. Yeah, it's tough with people that who have done it. And I know a lot of people think that they, well, as I've said, that they're doing it like the most pro-life manner by not wasting any of them, but I don't think any approach is really good in the
Right.
industry.
So what are some ways that you can help couples then who are trying to conceive and want to stay as pro-life as humanly possible and don't go through IVF? Like, how can you help them?
So I feel like you know a little more than me about natural treatments, which I
I
think is
I can
something,
speak to natural treatments, yes.
yes, that we need to focus more on. Because I feel like a lot of people just get referred to treatment, like to IVF treatments, without
Right.
going through any other type of, trying to balance their hormones correctly, or, the NaPro technology approach where you track your cycle and
Yep.
then work with that doctor and he can figure out where there may be issues with your
Right.
what may actually be going on, and instead of just going right to masking it with IVF. Yeah, so I would definitely tell people to go the NaPro technology approach first, which is, as I said, works with your cycle and to figure out issues. Yeah, and it also has an 80% success rate as opposed to 30% per IVF cycle. So definitely worth trying. And then there's also, I think there's a lot of issues that could cause infertility. Like,
There's so many issues. I
yeah,
mean,
like,
just our diets alone, just our food quality and stuff. But okay, so with
yeah.
sperm donors,
Oh, yes. Okay.
okay, I'm coming in hot with the
Here we
questions,
go.
okay? So sperm donors, a woman wants to get pregnant, whether she is married or not married, and just really, really wants to get pregnant. Is it the same process then? So like,
So she would, I mean, you can, I know people have done the IVF process in that situation. I think really just because they want to up the chances of getting pregnant. I don't know. But um it doesn't really make sense to me when you could do it naturally. So, I mean, not naturally, but they will usually do like the turkey baster route and
okay.
with the with the yeah, the donated sperm, and then get pregnant that way,
So
which
how do we feel about that?
children shouldn't intentionally be deprived of their fathers.
Hmm.
So, not okay with that.
Yeah, I get
Um,
that. Okay, so now we're going into more of a traditional lifestyle type conversation, and yes, I completely agree with that. So that may be unassociated then with the pro-life because obviously a woman's trying to get pregnant. Um, but when we talk about traditional family life and so forth, like you're still depriving a child of thriving in a traditional family with a mom and a dad, by going that route. So now talking about like traditional life and everything, being that you and I are both Orthodox Christians to be specific, does the official Orthodox Church have a stance on reproductive technology?
so not as concise as the Catholics. I wish we
Okay.
were more on the Roman Catholic level with this, but The Russian Orthodox Church has a very awesome social concept document that talks about being against IVF, against surrogacy, and it's awesome. Being against gamete donation. The Greek diocese also made one, but it's not as in depth. It condemns abortion. It talks about IVF a little bit due to the destruction of excess embryos, but it doesn't go as in depth as the Russian one. But there is no that I'm aware.
Can you send
General,
me those things and
yes,
I'll link
they're the
them?
best. Yeah, but there's no real general consensus with every Orthodox diocese.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, everyone else needs to get on the level of the Russian church here because this is a great document.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that. Okay, so the natural treatments. Now, I have a lot of experience in the natural world.
Yes.
Especially, it's a very long story that could make for a whole other podcast episode. I was wrongly diagnosed with PCOS and it led to this whole thing. But basically, I dove into natural fertility and like just went headfirst and learned everything I possibly could about cycle syncing and tracking your cycle and checking your temperature and all the things on how to naturally get pregnant. So that's what we're talking about whenever we talk about like natural fertility, right?
Yes.
Okay. So do you want to talk a little bit on that?
Yeah, so you had mentioned our food affecting
Yeah.
hormones. Yeah, there's a lot of things like even if you ever got a mercury filling when you were younger, like that can still be in your body and affecting your hormones. Um,
Vaccines.
yes,
Yeah,
that is
just gotta
also a
put that
whole
out
nother
there.
podcast.
Yes, whole other podcast episode.
Copper from IUDs. I mean, birth
Yeah.
control, totally. You sent me all those references on how birth control for years can mess up your chances of getting pregnant.
It is a band-aid and it
Crazy.
causes so many
Like,
problems.
yeah. And it like blows my mind how people don't realize how harmful these things are. It's just um
So, funny story. There was a company that I used to be really close with, sold there was like a nonprofit that sold these bracelets that tracked your cycle. They had different beads that tracked your cycle. And they were made, I believe, by a group of women in Haiti, I think it was. And the reason they did this was because the women in Haiti were taught about their cycle. So it was interesting. Like here, we're basically taught how to get pregnant, kind of. Like basically in health class, it's hey, if you have sex, you're gonna get pregnant.
yeah.
Not we don't talk about ovulation, none of
Totally got
that.
that Mean Girls reference in my head.
Right, right, exactly. But in these other countries, like they have no idea that they can control when they get pregnant. So you have these mothers who have so many children, and it was a relief to find out that they could basically plan to not get pregnant. Hey, natural birth control if you're participating in sex before marriage.
Yes.
So it's interesting in the different cultures and different countries and stuff how that's taught because they were amazed by this, so they use that bracelet to track their cycle. But the only time you can get pregnant is when you are ovulating.
Yeah.
And I don't think enough women know this because if they did, if women truly knew the power in their cycle, abortion wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah.
Like
People
we
just seem
wouldn't
to,
have to worry about unplanned pregnancies.
and there are so many apps now too that tell you like there's little like calendars that say like okay you can get pregnant on this day and this day and this day and like I can understand if you don't have a normal cycle like it can
Yeah.
get confusing and that's where you need to figure out how to balance your hormones and do it naturally but
Or
um
also just practice abstinence.
yeah
Whole
yeah
podcast
that's the thing
conversation there.
that I mean no that's too obvious no.
We're asking a lot for that one. I
Yeah
think
that's
that's society.
uh, gosh but yeah I know we were also going to talk about abstinence should we go go into that
What's your opinion on abstinence?
um It's good. I like it. No, well, in this society, oh goodness, abstinence has a very negative connotation to it.
Oh yeah, it does.
It's not the cool thing to do. So with abstinence, I just feel like we really need a whole shift in our society about how we view it, and we need to stop being so hypocritical with um so if you ask any parent, like, hey, do you want your kid to have sex before they're married or at least like in a fully committed relationship, even though that's not necessarily the best way to go because that
Right.
could end at any moment. But
Right.
um but I feel like a lot of parents would probably say, yeah, as long as they have someone committed to them, because we don't, God forbid we wait till marriage. And
Right.
I feel like, parents are going to say no, like I don't want my kid to do that. But the likelihood that the parent waited is not high. And we keep continuing this cycle of like, yeah, you shouldn't do that, but we don't,
It gets
we didn't do
worse every
that.
generation.
Yeah, exactly. And um yeah, so we need to break that cycle. But I also really agreed with you on the video you posted about, you were talking about abstinence and how you would like sleep with men that, I forget how you worded it, but like
There was
you
always hurt.
like you
So,
felt like they wanted you, but
mhm. But they didn't. They weren't actually
exactly.
committed, and
And
it led to nothing but hurt. Like I have nothing but regret with
yeah.
all with that. No shame around talking about this whatsoever. But it wasn't until, and honestly, it wasn't until my husband and I were married and like experiencing just sex the way
It
religiously, the
was
way that
supposed
God
to be.
intended it to
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
like with my husband, knowing that I was safe with him and that he was there for me and that he loved me and that he was committed to me because
Yeah.
he said those vows. And
And yeah, and
if
then aren't you also kind of like, oh, every other guy that I slept with did not deserve that vulnerable part of me. And it's
100%,
like, oh, it makes you so, it's just like, oh, why did I?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I regret it all the time. Like I wish I had my virginity to have given to my husband whenever I married him. And I posted that, right? And I got a lot of
Hmm.
comments. A lot of women, a majority of the comments that I had, especially on TikTok, because I feel like TikTok is where I get
Just
people who disagree with
a
me more.
hellhole. Yeah.
Instagram, I seem to have found a little bit more of my community. TikTok, we're still
Good.
making our way. But some of the comments were about how women were glad that they did experience other people before their spouses because then they were ready for their husband.
Mm.
They knew what they were doing or they learned different things and stuff. And I'm like, that's not the
Yeah.
point. That's
See,
not.
I would say I'm happy, not happy. I don't want to say happy, but I mean, I do regret it, but I also don't because I learned a lot from it. Like I learned that that's not how you should do it. And so I I just mean like, yeah, having
Mhm.
sex, like with someone who doesn't really care about you. Um and maybe I'll feel differently if I get married. Um maybe I'll feel like you and wish that I had saved it. But yeah, I don't beat myself up about it too harshly. So I'm like, oh, I learned from it, but I still, wouldn't recommend anyone do that. But yeah, I don't um
It's a difficult conversation because if we were having this conversation 100 years ago, first of all, this conversation wouldn't even be happening. We'd be just, it would be so,
yeah.
abstinence would still be so normalized. Like we wouldn't have to be trying to prove a point to society and stuff. Um, and then it's amazing how much it shifted. Like it was like scandalous at one point to for
Hmm.
a woman to stay the night in an apartment or something, whether they were having sex or not.
Yeah.
It was scandalous for a woman
Yeah.
to stay there. It was scandalous for a woman to be alone. Like, and then we just keep developing, and now it's like There's,
There's just
I mean, I met
no
my
shame
husband on
at
Tinder
all.
for a reason.
Yeah.
Like now it's just normalized that that's what people are looking for. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's crazy because you know what happens. You know what
Hmm.
happens from it. But
People just
there's
don't care. Like they don't think about that when, especially teenagers, like they're not like, "Oh, this is
no,
the oh, what was I gonna say? Like they don't care about STDs. They don't care about how having kids out of wedlock commits to, uh the dismantling of healthy society. Like they don't care. They don't think about these things.
right. And with treatments
um,
for everything, it's made it even more normalized. I mean, granted, I'm glad we have treatments for everything,
yeah. But
but
how
like,
many
hey, it's
yeah.
okay. Don't worry about it because we have treatment now. Like
Yeah,
it's
it's
not a
like
big scare anymore. And I mean, I'm glad that there's treatment for people
yeah.
who battle that.
But
I'm
it's
so
also
happy.
like, how do we don't think about, oh, maybe we should prevent this from happening in the first place.
Right.
But yeah, so I definitely agreed with you on growing up, I would have such a like I would just I mean we all did it as little girls, I think. Fantasize over like celebrities and all this stuff. And I
100%.
think that carried through into my definitely my first relationship, even though it was barely a relationship. He like wouldn't commit to me, but he'd have sex with me every time I went over. I thought he was so attractive, and I built him up in my head to be like so much better than he actually was.
Hmm.
And he was actually pretty emotionally abusive. And but like it didn't matter to me because it was like, oh, he's having sex with me, so he must want me. And it's like, no, like guys they can switch they can go from like there's nothing special about you like about you solely based on your attractiveness. Like guys can sleep with many women. Like it's not
Their
um
hormones literally dictate it.
yes.
That's naturally what their body wants.
Yeah. And so like women, well, younger girls especially need to be aware of that. Like they're just because he wants to do physical things with you does not mean that he cares about you.
Right.
And I hate to say it, but like there's, you're not as special as you think you are when it comes to that. Because since guys can, yeah, go through.
That's why pretty much almost every religion has rules or something in place about men fasting from sexual
Mm-hmm.
pleasures, or why masturbation is frowned upon and stuff in so many different religions and everything, because
Yeah.
it's literally what men were designed to do, was basically to reproduce. Like that's what their hormones tell them that they need to do. And so by fasting from that and having them not do it, they're fighting against the natural order, basically.
Yeah. And also when I assume it's the same for women. I know for men, when they orgasm, it's like I don't know, their body releases something, it's probably the same for us, that like bonds them with that person in a very unique way. It's biological thing. So when men watch like porn for instance, and they're
When they
trying
finish,
to use a word, yes, I'm trying to use a word besides orgasming, but it's not
when
coming to
they
me.
when they
Um,
finish, they
yes, when they finish, they are looking at this random woman and then they go through how many women, like just
yeah,
finishing how many. And like what does that do to your, like you don't have that bond, like it just messes up your bond, like your sense of intimacy, and it's just
yeah.
not
One-
healthy.
100%. Yeah, there's so much more to abstinence than just getting pregnant. Like there's so much more psychological stuff that goes on,
Yeah.
that we could heal ourselves from if society practiced abstinence more and normalized it.
Yeah.
We'd heal a ton of trauma if society practiced
Yeah, prevent a
abstinence.
ton, yes.
We would.
I'm all about preventing trauma. We need
I-
to
Do you think that there's healthier ways to teach this to teenagers? Because like I feel like Health 101 did a crap job.
yeah, it's really it's really difficult because obviously, as we said, abstinence isn't the cool thing to do. So, though it has been shown that abstinence-based education is more effective at delaying sex than comprehensive sex education, which makes sense because
Yeah.
yeah, because it's hard because if if you promote safe sex practices, then kids will think it's okay and you're condoning it. But then on the other hand, if you tell kids not to have sex, they're going to rebel and they're going to have sex. And so it's really hard. But um, I think other than having a total do-over and shift in our culture and not automatically associating dating people with having sex with them,
Mm.
and we also need to start with it needs to start in the home with parents establishing that foundation of trust to where if a child hears something sexual and like isn't sure about it, like at school, they're like, what is this? They go to their parents first with questions instead of asking their peers, like maybe like the peer that I don't know if they had like a porn magazine or something. Do those even still exist? I don't know. I feel like I'm sounding really old, like porn magazines. Um, but
I think
um,
it's all just online now.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is. But I don't know. But just if any kid has, anything sexual, and if they go to their parents first instead of like asking their peers, then that's better, I think, for it's because kids are really curious
Mm.
when they're young. And so just even and a lot of kids probably act they probably have sex just because they're like curious about all of it. And if your parents already told you like, hey, this, then already answered all of your curiosity questions, then you're probably gonna be less likely to do that. And because there's kids even like I work at the YMCA in the before and after school program, and there's third graders that make sexual references
Yeah.
and their parents probably have no idea that like they even need to be talking to their kid about this yet 'cause why would you, they're in third grade. But
Right.
like I don't know, like you need to get to your kids like
It's
early and not not necessarily go into all the details but
right.
just establish that, yeah, the trust with them so that they come to you first. It's the same with like Planned Parenthood. They infiltrate elementary schools so that with their sex education programs so that kids whenever they have questions will go to Planned Parenthood instead of their parents. And so it's kind of the same thing, like you just have to it's whoever gets to them first, like they're going to go to, so it needs to be the parents.
Right. Yeah. No, you're exactly right on that. So there's so much controversy around why a woman would have an abortion, such as rape and medical risks, etc. How would you defend the pro-life movement in those circumstances?
Well, I don't the only time I don't want to say condone abortion, but the only time I think it's okay is if the mother is if there's 100% chance that she's going to die, because it becomes more of an issue of self-defense than just out of convenience, really, of killing your kid for convenience. But that being said, that really doesn't happen. I would say the statistics are very, very low with needing to actually, like circumstances where you can't just deliver a baby early instead
Right.
of, killing it. And because my PCP used to deliver babies, and I actually asked him like, did you ever encounter a circumstance where you needed like to abort a baby instead of just delivering it early? And he was like, never. And I can't imagine when that would need to happen. Um, if a child is definitely going to die, grant the child the dignity of being born and dying naturally.
Yes.
I don't prematurely take your child's life. I don't know what mother would not want to do everything that she could to preserve her child's life.
Right.
Um, even if they weren't going to be around long after birth. Um, Rape definitely don't condone for the same reason that, this it's a human being. Um, and Scott Klusendorf, actually, he's a pro-life apologist. He founded the Life Training Institute, has this syllogism that um, he uses that I think is just really good for making the point that, because he made the point that when you start to answer questions from pro-choice people like, oh, well, what do you do to help mothers who have conceived in rape? What do you do to help women in these circumstances and stuff? When you start to say, oh, I do this and I do this, you're giving into the premise that you need to do any of those things to
Right.
oppose abortion. And so he has this syllogism that I really love. That's one, it is wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Conclusion, abortion is morally wrong, which is so simple, but it's
Yeah.
like that's really all you need.
That's it. Black and
So
white. It's wrong.
yeah. So with rape, these women need,
The women need counseling and therapy
yes,
and help, but that baby does not deserve to be
yeah.
killed.
And like rape obviously causes damage. You need counseling. Um, does killing your child really take away that trauma?
No, I think it would add to it.
No, exactly. And there's actually, well, besides rape being a very, very small percentage of why people actually have abortions, there's like the Guttmacher Institute, the pro-abortion Guttmacher Institute, even said like the majority of reasons that people get abortions are because a baby would dramatically change my life by interfering with my education or employment. I can't afford a baby. I don't want to be a single mother. I'm not ready to have a child. And yeah, so 98.3% of abortions are elective in the United States. So it has
Oh my
nothing to do
God.
with rape, incest, maternal health, or fetal health. So that's just the argument is just
It's not
just
an argument.
yeah, exactly. And I just call them all excuses. They're not
Yep.
arguments, they're excuses. And there was a in 1979, so long ago, a rape counselor, Dr. Sandra Mackhorn, um, found that 75 to 80% of victims who didn't abort their children said that they felt that abortion would just be another act of violence perpetrated against their bodies and their children's bodies. And they reported a sense that getting through the pregnancy meant conquering the rape. And while the perpetrator was selfish, she can be generous. And while he was destructive, she can be nurturing. So a lot of they, people that are for abortion act like every woman who's a victim of rape wants to kill her child. And
Right.
that's just
And that's
not
not
the
the case.
case. But yeah, and they definitely need counseling and healing from that rape. Yeah, but taking the life of your own child doesn't unrape you. It doesn't heal any wounds.
Mm-mm.
And and what's the other? Oh, incest. Yeah, same thing. That's
Katie, I have learned so much in this conversation and got fired up tonight. Is there
no.
anything that you want to share with our listeners?
I would tell everyone to follow them before us on social media.
Yes. And I'll make
Facebook,
sure that I
Twitter,
link them.
Instagram. Yeah. Sign up for the email list. We're starting a training program soon. If you think that you want to be interested in standing up for children's rights, I didn't go as much into that, but yeah, so we're going to be doing that. And I also wrote a book that is very slowly being edited, so that'll be out hopefully before summer.
Send me the link to that, add it to the podcast and stuff, so that way it's up.
Okay. Well, I
It's
didn't.
out.
It's not out yet, but
Yeah,
I will.
once it's
Yeah,
out, send me
yeah,
that.
when it
Yeah.
comes out.
And I'll make sure I link them before us and everything too. And I'll link you all your socials too, so everyone can connect with you.
Yay. Yeah, and you can look for me on the Federalist if you want to read some more things, and on Salvo magazine, read
Awesome.
more things about reproductive technology.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, Katie, for being on tonight and for all of this incredible wisdom that you have just brought into the world with it's such a difficult conversation. It's a difficult topic. It's a very heavy topic. But thank you for bringing science into it and for bringing truth. So thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
You have just listened to another episode of the Myrrh-Bearing Millennial Podcast. I don't know about y'all, but I learned so much from Katie in that interview, and it has just strengthened my position as a pro-life activist. I will definitely be sharing more about the pro-life movement on my Instagram channel, and soon I'm going to be launching a full YouTube channel. So I've got some surprises coming with that. Make sure you're following me on Instagram so you can see all the updates. We've got some videos coming your way very, very soon. That's the next step in my podcast / business expansion that seems to be happening in 2023, and I'm very excited about it. So if you're listening to this podcast, you are the first ones to learn that video is coming, and I'm very excited about this. So I just want to thank Katie again for being such an incredible guest on that podcast episode. We've got another great episode coming for you next Wednesday. I'll be releasing some details later this week. So again, make sure you're following me, turn on your notifications, and we will just see you over there on Instagram. Let's chat about this episode. Comment any questions that you might have. Reach out to me, send me DMs. I would be happy to answer any and all questions that you might have. So if you loved this episode, if you liked what you heard, please go ahead and rate this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to, whether it's 5 stars, whatever it is. Give it a rating, a comment, and share it with your friends to help get the podcast discovered. Thank you so much for listening to another week of the Myrrh-Bearing Millennial Podcast, and we'll see you next week.